the basic premise of Lean, where Lean starts, the foundation of Lean, is with respect for the people we work with.
To show respect, you have to do the clarity up front. When you do things up front, and you have clarity up front, chances are things are going to come out much better than when you rush through a conversation. This, for me, is a huge opportunity for leaders to show respect for people by developing them. And so it opens up this opportunity for you to read as a leader into a gap of what the skill sets are that might be missing from the person.
Respectful delegation actually is equal to an invitation to be engaged and involved. Hello, and welcome to the Lean Solutions Podcast. My name is Shayne Daughenbaugh, my lovely co-host, Catherine McDonald. We are here on this journey with you. Catherine, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm well, Shayne. I'm very well. It's been a good day. It's gone fast. It's always a good sign. How are you?
I am well as well. And again, for me, it's been a great day. It's still early for me here in the States. I know from Ireland, it's probably, 6, 5, 6, something like that? Okay.
Yep, 6.
Yeah. So good day for me today. This morning, I went to my local Chamber of Commerce and got to hang out with some really cool people that help grow my city. And that was really cool to see.
Oh, great.
The leadership and the growth of the city has been fun as well. We've been here for 20 years now, and just watching how the city grows, the things they're doing, that's been really cool. But it got me thinking, and I have a question for you. When was the time, because you haven't always been a consultant, you haven't always owned your own company, you have worked with other agencies, and I know we've talked about this before, some local government agencies or country agencies, whatever. Government agencies, what I was going for. When was a time when you really grew in your role, not just learned a new skill, but actually grew?
Yeah, good question. So absolutely, I wasn't always just working for myself. I started out working in social care, and specifically the disability sector. And I was in that sector for 13 years, and I had a boss during that time. For those whole 13 years, I had many bosses over the years. But I guess in answer to your question, there were different times where I felt I really did take a step up in my role, where I really felt myself growing. And I guess when I think back and really try to understand what those times were, it was always where I took on something that stretched me, that made me feel like questioning myself a little bit, to go, am I able for this? Is this something that I can do? Do I believe in myself enough? So my bosses that I had, I was very lucky in the bosses that I had, because they believed in me, I guess, maybe more than I believed in myself. And
Yes.
At the time, I think that's true, so always at those times of growth, it was always where they showed me that. But it wasn't just talk. It wasn't just, oh, Catherine, you're great, we believe in you. It was, what they did was they actually gave me work that was a big responsibility, was something that I had to deliver on, where there was clear deadlines, where it was important to the organization. So will I give you an example just very quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. So back when I started in the disability sector, there was a new kind of regulatory body that came in called HIQA, H-I-Q-A. And anybody from Ireland who's listening to this will probably have heard of them, but maybe other people won't. So basically, it was the Health Information and Quality Authority. And up to that point, Shayne, the disability sector in Ireland wasn't really regulated. There was no standards. So every organisation basically had their own standards. So at this point in time, the standards had just come in. And I was basically just out of college and just hearing about this HIQA and understanding that, oh, wow, I've just moved myself into a sector where suddenly we're being regulated and nobody has any clue what to do. But I think it seemed a bit daunting at the time. Everybody was in a little bit of a panic over it. But as I mentioned, the bosses that I had were really great. We were basically sitting around a management meeting table, and the senior leaders who were present at the table just went, we haven't a clue. We haven't a clue what this HIQA thing is. We haven't a clue what these standards will mean for the organization, but we trust that you guys will be able to handle it, right? So barely, I guess, a supervisor at the time, barely a team leader. They handed us the book of standards. This was a little booklet at the time. And in it, there was all these kind of broad sweeping statements like, ensure that your residents have privacy and dignity, ensure that they have choice in their day, and all these just sweeping statements that we hadn't a clue what to do with. So basically, it put the responsibility back on us to go back to our teams and to have the discussions about what these standards meant, and to challenge ourselves by asking ourselves these questions. Do we meet these standards? How do we meet these standards? And I'd never really done anything like that before. It had always been day-to-day management. What are we doing this week? What are we doing next week? So it really brought me into the world of strategy, of proper team planning for improvement. So for me, it was a massive big deal, being able to take on that responsibility and feeling like I was supported to do that. So it was great.
That's a huge deal that you were given that opportunity, right? Given that responsibility. I talk a lot with my clients and their leadership, about delegation as a way to free up a leader's time, because all the leaders that I've worked with, and probably you as well, have so much going on in their plate. How can we get things off their plate so they can do other things? Like they've surrounded themselves by great people. But are they able to get some of this off their plate? And as I think about it now, especially with what you're talking about here, delegation is a way of freeing up a leader's time. But what if we flipped that? What if delegation wasn't just about freeing up time, wasn't just about, efficiency and lean? What if it was about respect? Right? Like your leaders respected you enough and knew enough about you and saw something in you that you may not even have seen yourself. But giving you those responsibilities is a way of saying, Catherine, we respect you and what you have to offer as part of this team. Like, I think that's pretty awesome.
I think so, Shayne. I think it has to be one of the highest forms of belief in somebody by giving them those responsibilities. So anyway, that is what we are digging in today, into today with our guest. And maybe, Shayne, would you like to do the honors and introduce our guest? And
I would love to introduce Sam. Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you Sam Yankelevitch. I have to say this multiple times. Yankelevitch? Did I do it
Perfect.
justice? Okay.
It's all plan, do, check, act. It's all plan, do, check, act. You did well.
Yes. Sam is the CEO of Express Lingo Solutions, a TEDx speaker and a corporate trainer focused on aligning people, process, and communication to close performance gaps. As an industrial engineer and former VP of global operations, he also brings a deep expertise in lean, quality, and problem-solving methodologies. Sam is popular in LinkedIn Learning as a LinkedIn Learning instructor with over 750,000 learners. That's huge, Sam. And the author of several books, including Lean Potion Number 9, loving these titles, Walking the Invisible Gemba, and the fictional title, An Interview with Failure. He lives in South Carolina with his wife and borrowed dog. I just have questions here, and believes in lifelong learning and giving back. Sam, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and share with your audience.
I am as well. So real quick, borrowed dog. Like there's so much.
I put that in there. So I have I've got 4 kids. One of our youngest daughter went to college. She had a dog and it was just too complicated. So we kind of adopted it, and she's coming back for him very soon. So he's borrowed.
So he's borrowed for now.
He's tremendous. He's been my mentor. You always need a mentor, right?
Yeah.
So that's the borrowed dog.
Somebody who doesn't talk back to you, ideally,
Right.
Perfect. Exactly.
Sam, how did you get involved with LinkedIn Learning that you have that many learners that you've been able to influence?
Yeah, so it's just very fortunate, and to reach that amount of learners globally is a privilege, because you can't do that like just the way that just doing consulting and training the way that we usually do with at corporate clients or even at conferences. Right. You can do thousands, but to get the hundreds of thousands and to reach people in India and the Arab countries. It's been amazing. So it's just applied at the right time, send a demo reel, and got accepted, and then they were just threatening me with purchase orders, to, hey, could you do one of these, could you do one of that, but it's great work, because you have to focus on the learner, and when you focus on the learner, you're really forced to teach a certain way, to be very, very clear, and that has helped tremendously. But one thing that's left out of my bio there, so you can tell I got some gray hair back here, but
just a couple, not very many, just a couple.
But my motto is, I'm too old to grow up, I'm too young to stop learning, and delighted to give back. And so LinkedIn Learning has been an opportunity to do that globally, and so it's just been great, to be able to do that and share.
What are like your top, some of your top courses that you've taught?
Yeah, so the top courses are problem solving and root cause analysis, and then the other ones are all about communication, including one on lean, how to use lean principles to improve communication in corporations. And one of them is about delegation, which I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to talk about today.
Let's do it.
And then and corporate culture. So it's and it's all from just lean upbringing over the 40 years. I mean, before the word lean was coined, I was always somehow involved in continuous improvement activities. So it's just been a privilege to have access to this knowledge, and then be able to share it back with people in the world that can make it useful in their life and in corporate.
Awesome.
That's amazing, Sam. Well done. Congratulations. Really, really great. And on the books as well, which we didn't talk too much about, but as everybody heard, you have books there as well, which people can take a look at. So you touched on it there, that the topic for today that we're really going to dive into now is respect-driven delegation. So
right.
Everybody listening to this probably has some idea of what lean is all about, but lean, the basic premise of lean, where lean starts, the foundation of lean is with respect for the people we work with, right?
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about that when it comes to your experiences of facilitating lean in an organization, Sam, or an organization to be lean. What do you think is the best way, or some ways, to, let's say, balance accountability, which, there has to be this clarity of what needs to be done, expectations that need to be, said to people, there has to be deadlines and all of this. How do you get work done, make sure everybody's getting work done and following up on what they said they'll do, and balance that with, or do that with, respect for people when you're delegating responsibility? So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, that word accountability, by the way, is usually it's taken as a negative, which is kind of which is just a bad, a bad idea, because accountability is not negative. It's, and there's this famous quote that what is it? Accountability is what ties commitments to results. So what you just mentioned, Catherine, is very key, because at the end of the day, I mean, we're there to get results, right? And hopefully in a controlled way, because you're always going to get results, right? So the number one thing I talk about first is that accountability should not be negative. And sometimes you begin with positive accountability. What happens when somebody actually does make a commitment and then they follow through and there's success? Sometimes, sometimes we don't even recognize that. And culturally, there's a lot of managers that are going to say, well, that's their job anyways. But in some cultures, it's very important to do the recognition when something is actually gets done. That drives, that drives the true accountability, which is, something got done. But the accountability and how that ties to respect and delegation is, for me, is how do you do that? By driving clarity up front. between the person, the task giver, and the task receiver. When there's no clarity, then it's an unfair equation there because you might be setting up the other person for failure. And at the end of the day, you're going to set up yourself as a leader for failure as well.
Right.
So to show respect, you have to do the clarity up front. And that not only, and I'll explain through a framework that I use, which is a very simple framework. How do you do that? But at the same time, it's not only respect for people, but it's also respect for time. Because remember, when you do things up front and you have clarity up front, chances are things are going to come out much better than when you rush through a conversation, expectations are not clear, and through the intimidator function, you force the other person to say yes, and that yes might mean so many things. Yes, I just want you to move away from me. I want to get you out of my hair. I'm intimidated by you. I'm not really sure. Yes, but I'm not really sure I'm going to do it. Versus a respectful way to do it, where you clarify up front, also how you're going to measure performance. That that specific way that you can measure performance, which ties back to what we do in Lean, right? And otherwise, if you don't do that, as you will, you've probably experienced, yes, I did. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. No, you didn't. When you're talking about whether you fulfilled the commitment and performance was done, it's like, how do you measure? And so I'll get to the framework in just 1 second. But this for me is a huge opportunity for leaders to show respect for people by developing them. And so it opens up this opportunity for you to read as a leader into a gap of what the skill sets are that might be missing from the person. And the framework is very simple. I learned this from a coach. I was a very bad manager at one point, a very bad leader.
No.
Oh yeah, well, this is what you get.
That's experience right there.
But I was brought in to. This is kind of funny. I'm Colombian originally. So I have a Colombian built-in culture. I've been in the States for many years, and I've traveled the world. I speak many languages. So I have a pretty rich cultural background. I was brought in and hired to drive lean transformation in a German-based company in the US.
Wow.
And so here I am, a Colombian. I'm supposed to be the guy that's going to teach the German engineers who, I'm not going to generalize, but they're mostly known for knowing everything, and that everything is their way or the highway. And this was the case in this company. So it was very difficult at the beginning. And at one point, I had to have an executive coach, and he's the guy that taught me this with the following story. He had one of his kids ask if they can throw a party at the house, and he agreed, as long as they would clean the house after the party.
Sure.
The coach comes back to his house, and there's crumbs on the floor, and there's just one beer can left somewhere, and he says, "We agreed you were going to clean." And the boy says, "But I did clean." "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did." "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did." So what was the expectation? When you say the word clean, what does that mean? What did it mean to that person, and what did it mean to the person giving the task?
Right.
And so he taught me this framework that I now call it commitment conversations. And the commitment conversation is the process by which you can get to respectful accountability. It's made up of 5 steps, actually 6, but I'll talk about the 5. It's who is going to do what by when, which pretty much is where we stop. And that's where you're asking the other person for a yes. And unfortunately, depending on the culture, you're going to get an easy yes. That sets up an easy yes question. You're going to get an easy yes answer, and the yes can mean many things. In fact, I have a list of 10 yeses somewhere when I teach this. So there's 2 more elements, the what if and the what's next. The what if element is acknowledging that uncertainty exists. that means that I am acknowledging as a task giver that many things can happen between now that we agree on whatever the task is and when it's supposed to get done. So my ask is that when you see anything that might hinder the agreement that we just set for getting this task done, you let me know immediately so that we can both come back and figure out what to do and how to mitigate
Right.
the situation, right? So that's the fourth. The fifth one is what's next, and that is the follow up. So that is requiring and requesting that we follow up every Monday afternoon at 4 p.m. EST to make sure that things are on track. Now you have a common understanding. And by the way, in the who's going to do what by when, in that what, you're setting the measure. Clearly, how are we going to measure success in your performance? That way it's very clear. Now, so now you have these 5 elements in there, which is a very strong contract. I call that the standard. And when you're holding somebody accountable, you can go back to that contract. It's almost like a written contract, which encompasses all of these things with absolute and total clarity. But the cool thing is then that when you ask, even after you have all this conversation, you're not pushing for an easy yes answer because it might still be intimidating. That's where the respect comes from. And you open up with a different question and say, what might prevent you from doing this? What suggestions do you have to help us get through and actually produce the results that we're looking for? Those are typical questions. Later on, I'll share with you the magic question that really gets everybody involved. But we'll hold off to
Yes.
to do that. But there's a magic question that actually opens up that space to help develop people and show respect in a very specific way. So I've been talking a lot, so I don't know if you have any questions or anything.
No, I'm loving this. So, and I don't know, Catherine, what you were able to pick up, but who's doing what by when? So those are the two questions there. What if, understanding there's uncertainty in here, and how will we overcome these obstacles?
Right.
What's next? The follow up. And then what you just said, I also love that. And I don't know where you put that into the conversation, if that's just part of it, but what might prevent you from doing this. So now we have a dialogue. I'm not just telling you how to do things, but I'm trying to get also from you. Okay. So we're collaborating on this, whatever this task is.
Right.
So what do you think is going to be something that, we may need that may be in the way that we need to be aware of? So I am really appreciating how that conversation kind of flows and, moves around.
Right. And so that's that framework. And, I think when I've been out there doing this, people love frameworks because it's something to go back to, because we have very bad habits, that mention that I said, when you're talking about clean, I got the 4 kids, I've made that same mistake. And so we carry these bad habits from the house to work. And then we think that everybody understands 100% what our expectation is. And that just, it's not good. I'm going to introduce a one word that I wanted to share with your audience. Once you have that standard that you have an agreement on, if the agreement is not 100% clear for both, and each person walks away with a different expectation, what you then have is a misunderstanding. Right? You have a misunderstanding, right?
Yes.
And so I like to joke around with words, but this is for the lean community a huge opportunity to understand that, because I'm a big believer in communication and how communication actually drives actions. But we often forget that communication is not one way. Communication comes from the original Latin, the same basis, the same origin as common, as in common understanding.
Right.
And so I say that clarity is the effect of communication, should be the effect of adequate communication, and dialogue is really where where you want to get to that. And that common understanding is what I call the standard. So that when you hold somebody accountable, okay, now you have that 5-piece agreement, right? Now you hold, now the let's say the job didn't get done properly. You're going to hold that person accountable anyways in a respectful way.
Right.
How do you do that? You go back to the standard. You don't have to get emotional and said, look, you and I agreed that this and that didn't happen. They'll start out with a bunch of excuses. Yeah, well, HR didn't get me the people on time. Sales made some commitments that we weren't able to fulfill. The engineering department did this. They go out there in the blue yonder to a bunch of excuses. You're bringing them back to the standard, and you say, yeah, I understand that, but you and I committed. You committed to this. Plus, you
Right.
didn't let me know. You didn't let me know, and that is the biggest problem. Because you and I agreed that you would let me know immediately, and you didn't, and that kind of stuff. So that standard works as a contract to do the accountability in a very, I call that respectful, because at the end of the day, you went through the whole motion, you spent up time up front to prevent issues further down the line. And if that person did not commit, well, you're going to give them a second chance later on, and to build trust and stuff like that. But yeah, that's how it works.
Can I ask a question then, Sam? So just to try and understand these commitment conversations, I've heard you talk about the importance of clarity, the importance of communicating the expectation, measuring performance, showing respect while you're doing all of that.
Right.
How is that different to what most people would call a performance appraisal, or what we traditionally see in organizations as, here's the goals, we're setting your goals, here's what you have to deliver on, and I'm going to give you feedback. So how is what you're talking about different?
Okay. So the process might be similar. Performance appraisals happen periodically. Once, like they're periodic. I'm talking about a continuous coaching conversation with people to keep the momentum going in a plant. I'll give you some examples of how I've used and how it's different. So the performance appraisal will happen based on a period of time over 3 months, sometimes 6 months. There's companies that do these online. There's companies that do these once a year. It's too late. I like the commitment conversation models that plan, do, check, act cycles that happen very quickly, where you can actually build trust and delegate continuously, so that you can start building the skill sets, the competencies, and you're building organizational capacity, because you're able to delegate, and then as a leader, and not only are you letting the folks shine, but you are then making yourself available to take on your strategic tasks, because you're opening up time for yourself. But the beauty of this commitment conversation thing is that it's ongoing. I had several opportunities, both when I was in my last I left my last employment in 2013, which is like 12 years ago. And I went out into the world to do training and consulting and stuff like that. And it's amazing how this skill is so needed. It's a coaching skill to actually build capacity, so that people learn how to do problem solving, so that people are engaged, motivated. And and this is it's daily. It's daily. And I was able to do this in the German company, where we were thrown a curveball by the main customer, which was like 85% of the business. This was an automotive company. They said, well, you have to take all your business to Mexico, because it's, because we need the year-over-year pricing reductions and cost reductions. But we're going to throw you a bone here. You can do all the aftermarket for us, and we went from 40 part numbers to 1,250 part numbers that were low volume, high mix, high variety. And I had an incredible team of people. And so we went through this coaching. We went through the development of this. How are they going to do it?
Right.
And by training them, developing skill sets using this model, oh gosh, that was so successful because they were successful, because they were able to undertake. And I'm talking about a group of about 6 employees that were they just jumped on this, and this just went nuts. It was like, we called it flawless execution. We used standard work, 5S, SMED, you know,
Right.
layered process audits, all of the fun lean stuff, and it was just churning. And this was in the U.S. So it was so
I
it's, you know, it's
I
one of
love
the
that.
examples. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you, while we're on kind of examples, you know,
Yeah.
in doing this, and I love how you're tying this in, and I'm kind of moving down our list of questions, Catherine, just a little bit. Can you share an example where this, and I'm going to tie this back into the, you know, the topic again is respectful delegation. Like, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Can you share an example where that has led to personal growth, as well as, I mean, you kind of indicated that it also, you know, led to organizational growth or improved
Sure.
outcomes. You
Sure.
just threw some numbers out there as well. So I see
Yeah.
this tied through, but what I'm looking for is just something for our listeners to, you know, to really be able to sink their teeth into, like, hey, this idea of respectful delegation, of, you know, these commitment conversations, these kind of things, they lead to personal growth, as well as, you know, let's
That's
not
right.
forget the people that are doing this work.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, thank you, Shayne. Yeah, and that's actually very important for me. So another instance. So that one that I mentioned earlier, obviously the people were just totally engaged, motivated, and I'll just say the word meaningful work. For them, it was meaningful work. They wanted to
Sure.
come to work,
Yep.
and you know, they just enjoyed. Very similar thing happened. I was abroad. I was in a European company as a interim manager for 6 months, and this was a very strange situation because I found out that by asking the managers. So I was the general manager or acting general manager. I had 6 managers, and they pretty much told me, they said, our job description is not about problem solving. We do not problem solve, which was the strangest environment I was ever
I
in.
don't know what managers do then. You know?
Well, yeah, we'll leave that for another podcast. But so I said, well, but we have these issues, you know, and I'm a Gemba guy. I go to the Gemba. I'm the guy that is on the shop floor continuously looking for opportunities. And I see everything on the boards, and I see the repeat issues. And I say, well, we got these repeat issues that are preventing the company from growing. Well, that's not our problem. So I went the next level down as a coach, and I'm starting to coach people on, you know, through the commitment conversation model, but also coaching them on problem solving. It turns out the team that was just below that level, I'm talking about engineers, logistics personnel, HR, you know, a lot of operational folks, they all knew A3 thinking. They either in the company or elsewhere, they had A3 thinking. They were just not asked to do this, or maybe not allowed. And I said, okay, well, let's just take this one problem. What do you need from me? How can I help? And they said, just stay away. They said, because I said, how can I? And they said, stay away. We got this.
Yeah.
And they invited me to a meeting like the next day. And they said, here's the problem statement. Here's here's what we're looking at. We've walked the floor. Here, you know, they went through the whole thing. And they were thrilled to be able to jump in and solve problems. It was very, you know, there's just a satisfaction to them. Yeah. And the other thing was, because this was a very hierarchical company, the approachability between myself as a general manager and the people below the level of managers, for them was like really, you know, really engaging. So I think that led to both their personal growth and as well, they started churning out solutions to problems. And then, of course, in one fateful meeting, I asked, and then there were 3 managers that started to jump on the bandwagon. You know, 3 out of the 6, which wasn't bad, but there were still some that just wouldn't do it. And I made a snide comment, and I said, well, kind of what you were saying, Shayne. What do we need you for? So they didn't like that, of course. That was kind of insulting. Maybe disrespectful, but maybe it was respectful in a sense.
Respectfully
To
challenging.
bring to talk about the elephant in the room and bring it up, because respectful doesn't mean politeness. Respectful means let's bring the truth to the forefront here and work on the right things.
So on that then, we are trying to strike a balance here always, I guess. So we're trying to be respectful to people, always. We are trying to delegate, let's say, authority, or give people the opportunity to take work on and be involved in everything, because that's respectful. But we also have to be clear on our own standards and expectations. So you're all the time trying to balance getting across what we need people to do to align them to strategy and plans, but at the same time give them enough space to make their own decisions, solve problems for themselves. So what, in your experience, Sam, what can go wrong there? What's the kind of mistakes that we make when we're trying to get this balance right?
Yeah, I mean, let me see if I understand if I understand the question, Catherine. I think it has to be clear what our role is as a task giver.
Mm-hmm.
If our role as a task giver is to be the boss, then even if we use this framework, it's going to sound mechanical, technique, and it's going to be intimidating, and so I think the role, I think it's about the role that the person giving the task has to play. It's this thing where the boss has the status, has the title, but usually the boss title and the status in a very hierarchical situation doesn't explain what they do, doesn't explain the roles. And I think the roles are coach, problem solver, listener, integrator, colleague. These roles have to be very clear up front. And once you understand your role as a leader, then that helps. I've seen so many intimidators that are just just to get the yes, to do the gotcha. You said yes,
right?
And that I took that yes as a yes. You're going to fulfill your commitment no matter what. And if you don't, I'm going to nail you to the wall. And and that comes out. I don't know if that's kind of what you were asking.
And I mean, what I've seen is that sort of pressure that leaders sometimes put on people in those conversations, coaching conversations, it doesn't always come from a bad place either. Leaders are good people, but they sometimes make mistakes. They sometimes are fearful for their own work. Maybe they're fearful of somebody they're reporting to, and that pressure gets on people reporting into them. So I think what you said there is really key. Understanding your role as the leader in this position. My job is to ensure that the work is done, but it's not my job to tell people what to do. So it's about the mindset going into those conversations shapes everything. So I think that's a really good answer, Sam, for everybody listening, in answer to that question of how do we get that balance right? Well, you check yourself first. You check your mindset before you go into these conversations. That shapes your behavior, your words, your language, and all of that. So I think it's an excellent answer.
Yeah. And let me add to that, Catherine, just as part of the framework, the follow-up question, which is that and what's next. The follow-up question is partially an answer to prevent that from happening, by the way, because when you're following up, so let's say that if your task is only 2 days, there's not much follow-up. But what if your task is 6 weeks, right?
Sure.
So in the interim, many things can happen. So when you ask the follow-up question, say, okay, I want you to agree that we're going to meet as part of our standard. We're going to meet every Monday at 4 p.m. I want to make sure that you're going to be there. Okay. Now, the boss or the leader is co-accountable to make sure that progress report happens. Now, I've had people, I deal with folks from everywhere in the world. There's some cultures that don't like to be micromanaged, or they say, I don't need you to babysit me, Sam. If I give you my word, it's my contract. I don't need you to babysit me. Now, if you have good trust with them, maybe you let it go. But for the most part, my reply to that is, listen, I have to report to my customer every week on Tuesday. So I need to know on Monday. I don't want any surprises. I don't want to have to lie to my customer. I want to know. And that's the reason why I need to meet with you and follow up. And guess what? Many times the task givers are not following up, and they have to hold themselves accountable for not doing that, because at the end of the day, if you do have a surprise, then shame on both, right?
Right.
So, shame on both parties.
In what I'm hearing, just the way it's working in my head, some of these words you're saying are like connecting together, and I have written down here one of the things: respectful delegation actually is equal to an invitation to be engaged and involved. Like that's really what you're saying. You're building that culture, Sam, or at least that's what I'm hearing. You're saying is you're building that culture as a leader. That yes, I'm going to respectfully delegate. We have all of these jobs. You mentioned here's all these lists of things that have to be done or problems that have to be solved. I want to invite you, Catherine, into this. So of this, hey, let's have this conversation. How are we calling it? The commitment conversation to invite you into this. Right. Is that kind of what I'm catching? Because that ties into kind of our last question as we wrap this up, in how do we continue to create this culture where team members feel empowered to take ownership, even that they're not waiting for you, Sam, to say, all right, I showed up, I got my pencil, now give me something to write on. Well, what am I doing? But, feel you build this culture where you continue to invite into engagement and invite into the work that we're doing, where they feel empowered to take ownership and know that they're supported and trusted. What are some things that you can list for our listening audience or those that are watching, to kind of create this culture that where they feel empowered and supported and trusted?
I'm going to share one more word with you, with the audience, and that word is strategy.
Strategy.
Okay, and what you're talking about is if we don't do the commitment conversations, I don't know if this is coming out backward in the.
No, it's perfect.
But strategy is when you are not doing the commitment conversation model, and you're not thinking of the other person, and you're not there to develop, but just to be the boss and be intimidating. That's a strategy, because what's going to happen is that you're setting everything up for failure on both ends. So. I promised I would share one more tip from the framework of the type of question. I think this might be a gem for the listeners. It has been for most of the folks when I do the training. It's a scaling question, and it comes from solutions focused coaching. And so I'm working through this: who's going to do what by when, what if, and what's next. And then I'm going to ask Catherine, how comfortable on a scale from 1 to 10. Where 1 is not very and 10 is very comfortable, how confident do you feel that you can actually fulfill the commitment? So Catherine is going to say, Sam, maybe a 6, right? Maybe a 6. Oh, that's very nice. Very cool, Catherine. So why did you say 6 and not 4? So the person's going to answer why they said 4. And guess what? You're going to understand their strengths. Immediately, what it's pointing is to their strengths. Right. And then you build, and you know what their strengths are and how you can delegate other things to them based on what they just replied, why they got to a 6 and not a 4. Now you're asking as a leader and say, how can I get you to move from a 6 to a 7? And how can I help? That is a leadership coaching question that will really engage the other. And how can I help? Now, remember, or notice, I'm not saying how can I get you from a 6 to a 10, which goes back to our Kaizen thinking, that when you're going small steps, you are engaging people because there's less fear, there's more psychological safety involved, because you have to take a small step. It's not, how can I go from 6 to a 10? Oh, well, that's going to be difficult, right? And so that opens up a space for tremendous dialogue, conversation. Really, it sets a very safe space for that other person to come up and say, hey, and by the way, I have this suggestion. I'm thinking that if we do this, this, and that, you might not have to do it this way. We might be able to do it that way. So that, so it's a very engaging thing. If the listeners have some kind of a lean daily management system already in place, this is a tremendous coaching opportunity to use this framework, because lean daily management at the end of the day is daily accountability, meaningful work, engaging people for continuous improvement, and using this is very powerful. It's just a very powerful framework. So it's really
I'm so glad we're highlighting accountability today, because I do think accountability is sometimes the piece that's missing in our coaching conversations. I think, and I speak a lot about this with a friend of mine, but empathy is almost taken over. This word empathy, we have to, listen to people, understand people, and we do, but we have to balance our empathy with accountability as leaders. So I think what you've given us, Sam, today is a way to do that in a respectful way, because the job has to be done. People have to be clear on what they need to do. It's not all about, simply listening, sitting back, giving people the floor. We have to be able to do both for business to work. So I think that's been really, really, really helpful and useful. And thank you, Sam.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that this has been a good opportunity for the listeners to get something of value.
I got a page worth of stuff, including strategy and
by the way, just a quick plug. So my course is on LinkedIn. There's a course that is called Improved Communication Using Lean Thinking. And then there's another one that is called Getting Things Done with Commitment Conversations, which explains the model really well. Yeah, it was, I think it's 2 years old. So there's some new stuff that I've added in my trainings. I just did trainings for a large company in January in 4 different locations. So there's some new things that come up, but it's a lot about psychological safety, empathy, but getting the job done, which is what Catherine mentioned. We're still lean is still about getting it done, getting the right things done in the right way. So.
And everybody's happier when we get work done. Everybody's happier. So it's still a shared goal. So it's all about how we go about it. So Sam, and you're on LinkedIn, you mentioned earlier, and your books, are they on Amazon?
They're on Amazon. Yeah, they're on Amazon. My latest book is An Interview with Failure, which is my first fiction book. It's just an interesting study. I anthropomorphized failure as a person or as a character and interviewed it. And it had a lot of things to say about failure. And of course, I used a lot of the lean thinking and this stuff, but it takes away the fear of failure, So it was just a very cool book to work through. Yeah. So it was,
Well done. Well, this went so fast, Shayne, didn't it? I would love to talk for longer.
I was writing feverishly, trying to stay listening and whatnot.
I'm glad.
Yeah, it has flown by. Sam, thank you so much for what.
Thank you all very much for the invitation, for allowing me to share.
No problem. So, Shayne, we have to wrap up.
Okay. Then I'll let you do it. Wrap up.
Okay, listen, thank you, Sam. Thank you, Shayne. As always, lovely to see you as well. And we will say goodbye to our listeners. And don't forget to check in next time on the Lean Solutions podcast. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.